Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabados of Delmer, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of jbiztechvalley.com and Statewide News Service. We welcome you. How you doing over here, Miss McDonald of the third, and Assemblyman of the Cohoes, I know,
from
but
the city
what's
of
your
Cohoes.
district? From the city of Cohoes, but obviously there's a bigger district than that.
Very large district.
Where is exactly your district? So
Actually,
people should know.
we have three counties, Saratoga, Albany, and Rensselaer County. We start up in Waterford, Cohoes, Watervliet, Green Island, City of Albany, North Greenbush, Rensselaer, and City of Troy. Half of Troy, south end of Troy, and for Albany, it's mostly the eastern border, but it's actually a larger presence now than my predecessor, Ron Canestrari. Ron used to represent all of East Greenbush, which is about 16,000 people, and basically those 16,000 people were made up in the City of Albany. So, for the first time in a good 20, 27 years, that the legislator who covers the River District, as we call it, that's what we've always called it, actually has a larger presence in Albany than ever before.
Now, the governor's mansion is in your district.
Interestingly enough, the governor isn't, but the bishop is.
Oh.
I always say the story that if the governor walked out to get his newspaper and his jammies, and then we blew across the street, he'd be in my district.
So that was,
Yes,
Pat
the
Fahey is
Pat Fahey does have the governor's
mansion,
and also the Capitol.
cathedral is
The cathedral-
in your district,
Actually, no, the bishop's residence.
but not the cathedral.
Not the cathedral, the residence. So it's the other side,
Okay.
the east side of that street. Isn't that interesting?
It's
Okay.
interesting, but it's such a mixed bag. I mean, you find it difficult to look for everybody's interests. I mean, you have such a mixed
Well,
kind of, farmers are out in the suburbs and then city and...
I'm really the urban legislator here, the urban assembly member here in the Capital Region. If you really think about it, 5 cities, all right, Cohoes, Watervliet, Troy, Rensselaer, and Albany. It's really an urban agenda in my perspective. No disrespect to my friends in North Greenbush and Waterford, they are more suburban, but and I represent their interests as well. But the reality is, I'm the urban legislator, and being a mayor for 13 years of an urban city, I think that's what kind of helped me when moving into this position.
Are you on the Assembly Cities Committee?
I am on the Assembly Cities
Because that's a
Committee.
prestigious committee for a freshman legislator.
It appears to be, yes. It's where you want to be. I mean, I'm in. When you look at the 5 committees I'm on, we're on real property, we're on cities, aging, and mental health, which plays well for my healthcare background, and then tourism and historic preservation, which obviously these 5 cities. You look at the rich history of Albany and Troy, and of course Cohoes and Watervliet. That bodes well
It
for
all
my
makes
background.
sense. Eventually, once you get more senior, you'll be on the health committee, I'm sure.
I
That's
would
a
think-
committee you want to be on, I presume.
I would think health and higher education are areas where I would think I'll aspire to it someday, but that takes time.
But even though you don't really have too many colleges in your district,
Maybe
you're
our-
Well,
RPI is
RPI
Troy.
and Russell Sage are going concerns. Hudson Valley as well,
that's in your district
in my district. yeah.
proper.
Yep.
RPI is in your district
Oh,
proper?
yeah, yep.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that you were.
Yep. And a tech park as well.
Right. But
That's
New
a big
Albany's
district. It's
Albany's
really-
not in your district.
U Albany, the downtown
campus is in
yeah.
your district?
Yeah, and
Oh.
getting back to Albany, Pat Fahey is the other member. We work very closely together. I think Pat and I are almost joined at the hip for most
Yeah.
of the session, because we've looked at the fact that Albany should still have 2 representatives. It just so happens I'm one that's outside the city limits. She's within the limits, but we work very closely together, share a lot of duties together. We don't look at it as if it's Pat's issue or John's issue. We look at it as if it's an Albany issue, which is, I think, what the expectation is.
So, usually they say, they always say, well, the assembly and the whole government's run by 4 people. But how much influence do you feel that, or now you feel, that you have in that? The way they say it is like, well, all these guys don't make a difference. Just 4 guys are going to sit there and cut up everything. And so I say, wait, what's the assemblyman people doing over here? If they're just,
That's a fair question, and I can't say that sometimes that perception is out there. I will say this, first of all, from going from the position of mayor, where you're responsible for the day-to-day operations for the last 13 years, to go into the assembly, that was a transition that was a little bit challenging for me at first. But at the same token, when I was mayor, I worked always in a collaborative spirit, and that's what you need to have in the assembly.
And does it exist?
It does exist.
Yeah.
Now, it exists primarily behind closed doors. Conference is when we, as Democrats, battle it out, for lack of a better term. I mean, the reality of when you look at the makeup of the Assembly, there's 150 seats, 107 are Democrats, 43 are Republicans. The Democrats, provided they stay together, will move the agenda. And for the most part, the conference does move the agenda in most aspects. I can say this, in my short tenure there, there's been certain things I've agreed with the conference, there's things I've disagreed with, and I've shared those concerns directly with the Speaker. The Speaker has been very clear. He's invited me into his office to go over those issues. There's been many times when I've been there with other senior members on significant policy issues, sharing my thoughts. And in most, but not all circumstances, my thoughts were accepted, and I think
Very
that's
good.
important.
Well, then,
Now,
that
don't
is
get me
an
wrong. I'm not a
important
power broker.
No.
But at the end of the day, I will say this, and I know a lot of people have their own opinions about the Speaker, but from my perspective, he listens to his members, and he listens to his members, and tries to accommodate their interests as best as possible. But understand something: New York State is an extremely diverse state, more diverse than I ever gave it credit for. So therefore, sometimes it's very hard to herd everybody together to get on the same.
Sure.
And at some point, leadership has to make a decision.
And you understand that coming from leadership.
I know it very well. And that being said, you know what? Sometimes you walk out and you might only get half a loaf. But sometimes that half a loaf's better than no loaf at all.
Well, that's just the name of the game, really. I mean, you're not going to get everything in every situation, especially so diverse. So it's, you know, on one hand, you have to pull for yourself, but then on the other hand, you have to know when to, you know, take what you got and be happy with. I mean, that would be
Well,
a situation.
in the Assembly, what they say is, you know, it's a start. And then we work on getting more in later years. So at least we know we still have a goal, and we still got this, but now we got to move towards doing the rest of the agenda. So that's what I've heard 30-some-odd years in the Assembly.
I was amazed when we would have several hours of debates on bills
Yeah,
that were going nowhere. There were only one House bill.
right.
And I finally turned around after a couple weeks and said, why are we doing this? Because there's no Senate sponsor. The governor has no interest in it, because we want to lay our stake in the ground. Here's our position on X.
Right.
And the reason being is 10, 15 years down the road,
X
may actually grow into a bill, depending on the winds of change. And
And you
there's
could
certain type of pride in saying that's been our position since day one.
Well,
It's
that-
interesting.
There's
And-
groundwork for it.
Yeah.
And that's happened, I think, with nanotech also, in that, you know, George Pataki had tried to take credit for the blossoming of of nanotech, and then Speaker Silver takes credit for being the first ones to really push it, and then Governor Cuomo says, well, wait a minute, I signed the first bill, and I was the one who saw the vision here with Elaine Caballeros. So, you know, everyone has their own claim to fame at some point down the road when it comes to the nanotechs. You know,
Fortunately,
so.
successful nonetheless. But you talk to most of the historians in the building, both pro and con, Democrat, Republican. It started with Mario Cuomo and Sheldon Silver.
Well, that's, you know, but again, George
But
Pataki says
George Pataki played a large role.
it
He did.
bloomed and
Yeah.
expanded under his
It
tenure.
became visual then.
Right.
And, you know, I think that's the important part about government. Government just doesn't begin and end with one person. It's a whole process.
Yeah,
But there are certain people that, you know, make the point. But you're absolutely right. If we can't work together, if we can't compromise, if we've become a society of absolutes, then we've lost our democracy.
Explain to me what happened in the city of Cohoes with your salary and the current mayor, George Primo's salary, and the shift in the amount of money
Yeah.
and all that. Could you just explain?
Yeah. I mean, you had to go back to 2000. When I took over as mayor, the salary for the mayor at the time was $62,000. I cut it to $45,000. We were looking at a $3
You
million.
cut the salary
I cut
of
the
the mayor.
salary.
That's pretty good. I never heard of
Yeah,
anybody doing
and
that.
I cut it with the full realization that, you know, I told people very clear when I was running for office, I'm still going to own my pharmacy. I'm going to run my pharmacy, but I'm going to commit myself full time to being mayor. And history has shown that I was more than full time in that aspect, working into the wee hours of the morning throughout the course of the day. But same token, I took that cut because the city was in such financial disarray, multi-million dollars in deficit, that we needed to set the example and set the tone. And I've always said publicly that the day I leave office, there needs to be a public discussion about the mayor's salary. Now, the transition here was not the way I really expected it. I was kind of hoping to linger in the mayor's office a couple more years, but when you have a long-time sitting assembly member step down from a position, especially my friend and neighbor Ron Canestrari, you have to look at the opportunity, and I said, you know what, this is the time. The incoming mayor last year, when we did the budget, we moved towards saying, okay, you're not going to be here full-time. He readily admitted that because he still had an election to run. So he actually brought on additional staff members to help him deal with the day-to-day things. People, they want answers now. They want phone calls returned right away. They want emails returned right away. That's the bar I set, and that's the bar he wanted to keep going. So therefore, he lowered his salary to $35,000 because it reflected the fact that he was not going to be there on a full-time basis. I'm not really sure exactly what numbers report because I'm no longer part of the budget process there, but he was looking for somewhere around a $70,000 salary, which one could argue that based on inflation, and I had not taken a raise in the last 3 or 4 years of my time in office. You can make that argument, but like anything else, it's not the idea.
How's the budget doing now?
The budget was passed last night, from what I understand. He's back at $60,000, which is where I was at when I left.
Making it even, or you're in deficit?
During
But the city itself has a $3 million surplus now.
Oh, very good.
We did okay the last 13 years. We scrimped and saved, and we're very mindful of the taxpayers, and didn't really have much of an increase. Over 13 years, I think our average increase per annum was like 1.25%.
Now, I'm sorry, let me just ask you, if you had, when you first took office or somewhere in the beginning of your term, you cut it from,
60 to 45.
to $15,000. But then when you left office and after 13 years, you were back up to $60,000.
Right. It was like $59,000.
Right,
Because
give or take.
over the course of the years, there would be a 2%, 3% raise.
Okay.
But that was part of what was approved by
Why
the
not
charter.
hold it, $15,000 in a budget deficit that in the millions,
Right.
$15,000 is just simply setting the example.
It was
as you
setting
would
the
say.
example.
So it's not making the
Right.
difference in the budget.
Right.
But you were
Well,
still,
we made the difference in the budget and our actions during my
Right.
time as mayor. To go in with a $1.5 million, $2 million deficit,
and come
and
out with $3 million surplus.
surplus,
Yeah, that's a pretty good turnaround.
with just a little bit over 1% per year annual increase in taxes, I think we earned our keep.
And you lost population in the city of Cohoes.
Absolutely not. We turned the tide for the first time since 1930. We increased the population.
How much?
We were at 15,400. We're at 16,004 now. We increased it by about 5%.
Okay.
I think we're 15.7 prior to the last census. The new census that came out in 2010, we actually increased it. We're over 16,000 people for the first time.
It
since 1930.
almost seems that, in those old westerns where you see the name of the town, you see population,
Yeah,
and then you see
yeah,
the number,
yeah, yeah,
and you cross it out, and you put when someone dies or
And
someone born,
From
and you could do that in Cohoes.
every year from 1930 going forward until my last couple of years in office, we actually saw a very consistent, precipitous decline. But we actually turned the page.
What was it? New construction, housing?
Mostly it was new construction, and we were really open to development. I learned very early in my tenure as mayor that we've proven over the last 6 or 7 decades that Cohoes just staying within its own cocoon was
Right.
not going to advance. I spent a lot of time going out to chamber breakfasts, going to CEG events, commiserating with a lot of different people, and being aggressive. We have an IDA, we had a local development corporation, we sought grants to help support starting projects. Obviously by far probably the largest signature project, maybe the 2 largest signature projects, was the redevelopment of the Harmony Mills. You have over 750,000 square feet of abandoned bulking space that now is state-of-the-art loft apartments. And there's nothing to compare it to here in the capital region. And they're commanding huge market rents.
Even the Rosenblum properties that's down by Chapel Street?
Those are nice properties, but those are primarily new construction. These are all renovated. They're lofts, 16, 17-foot ceilings, hardwood, natural brick. They're very something. If you haven't seen them, it's worth a Sunday drive to take a look.
No, I have to tell you, that when you said that Ron Canestrari was your friend and neighbor,
Yeah.
they do live on the same street.
We
Really?
live next door to each other.
Roosevelt
Yeah.
Avenue, yeah, next door to each other.
Yeah.
And who you also have another famous person on Roosevelt, don't you? Another elected official, isn't there?
Actually, the city court judge.
City court
Yeah,
judge.
yeah.
Okay. So there's,
Yeah.
you know, Roosevelt Avenue is really where, I mean, it's properly named after the president, but, you know,
Must have
that's
something to
really
get
the
into the
street.
politics.
I'm surprised
Yeah,
Tom
get
Klingon
into
didn't live
He lived 2 streets away.
2 streets over. Okay.
You know, one thing, again, I'm a rabbi, I'm not a city development planner, but when I first got here, whatever, over 25 years ago, they said, go to Cohoes, someone told me, and you're going to see a waterfalls. You don't have to schlep, you see, and you should put a Jewish word in there. Drag yourself, schlep yourself to Niagara Falls. It's just as good to go to Cohoes, and I did, and it was
To Cohoes Falls, yeah.
the Cohoes Falls, incredible. But you know, I mean, tourism is always such a good market.
I was talking about the Harmony Mills as being one of my achievements. By far, re-exposing and putting 2 new overlooks of the Cohoes Falls definitely was one of my crowning achievements. And that basically took sitting down with the power plant operator and negotiating a deal. They've invested over $3 million into 2 beautiful overlooks, which actually allows you to get right down to the base of the falls on days when it's safe. And we've also increased the flow of water over the falls, particularly on the weekends when we're going to have more inclined to have tourism. And the tourism numbers have stepped up dramatically. I do not have this past year's numbers, but I know my last year, 2012, I believe they had over 15,000 visitors to the Cohoes Falls.
Well, and you have 15,000 population, 16,000 population.
It's a lucky number. Play it.
That's a play it on the,
But
but that's
you
good
make
that
any
you're.
money on it? I've gone there. Maybe it's been a few years, the truth to tell,
Yeah.
but I have gone there, and it was developed. But you know,
The beauty of it is it's a private area. It's a private park. It's not a public park. We don't charge for it, nor does the
Yeah.
operator. Brookfield is our partner in that. They did that as part of their FERC license agreement, but that was something that we really negotiated for.
So
we want a
the
public improvement.
Operators Brookfield who?
Brookfield Power.
Brookfield
They
Power.
they own and operate the power plant that's there.
And where does that power go to?
It goes on the grid. It goes
So
right
it
on
doesn't,
the grid.
it's not like Green Island where it benefits that village of Green Island.
Green Island has a very unique, and trust me, I have studied this very
Yeah.
closely because at one point we tried to take over the power plant in
Right.
my early years when we were facing a major tax cert case. Green Island Power Authority, Long Island Power Authority, and New York Power Authority are the only 3 municipally owned power authorities in the state of New York, have been that way since 1973, I think,
And
when
why-
Mike McNulty got it
Right.
as supervisor, and will only be the only 3 in the state. Green Island got it. I don't know how they got it. Mike McNulty was the architect of that at the time. But the state doesn't allow municipal power authorities anymore. Maybe electrical services, but the power authority gave them the ability not only to produce, but also more importantly, distribute their own power. Because when you look at your energy bills, particularly today,
Yeah.
it's the transmission and distribution charges that are the majority of your charges. The commodity, the electricity, thankfully, has dropped to pennies per kilowatt.
So good that you're on the tourism committee in the assembly because you and you have a record to show positive
We've
track
had- we've
record
had-
in tourism as mayor in your city.
I say this quite often, you know, when we were freshmen this time last year, we met with the speaker. He said, listen, there's certain committees freshmen are not getting on. You're not going to get on your first year, education or health. So
'Cause those are the
here's
most
the list of
prestigious.
20, well, yeah.
yeah.
It's the ones that's where most of the excitement and energy is. He
So
said,
here's the list of.
here's a list of 25 committees. Give me your top 10. So I was careful in what I did. And I have to say that he also said, attach your resume. My resume's gotten a little bit longer over the years.
Yeah.
And I can say that they made a very good analysis and pairing up of my background with the committees that I was assigned to. And I'm happy to do that, particularly mental health and aging with healthcare. I mean, with my healthcare background and with
You
all the
being a
changes,
pharmacist,
being a
you mean?
pharmacist, yeah, exactly. Or as we said earlier, a drug-selling legislator.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could say that. We would be.
Right? That's my opening line when I speak to groups. It gets their attention.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Don't know why.
So let me ask you about the pharmacy. You were telling us earlier that you've had some folks in the Jewish community, prominent folks now.
Well, yeah, probably the one most prominent is Jack Rosenblum. Jack Rosenblum worked for my grandfather, Jim Mara, back in his early days. And every time I see Jack, he reminds me of how my grandfather really inspired him to get into business. And back in those days, that's back when Russell Stover candy and Whitman's candy, which is now you can buy almost anywhere for $5 a box. Back then, that was the drugstores, not just ours, but every little mom and pop pharmacy. That was their niche. And my grandfather was excellent at merchandising, and that's where I think Jack got the business bug. I mean, he's still...
And now he runs Rosenblum Development.
Right, and he's done very well. He doesn't sell candy anymore. He builds buildings, he builds lives, he builds offices, and he's done very well by it. And my recollection is he's done very, very well, which is good. A lot of good things happening.
And now there was somewhat of a Jewish community in Cohoes, and we've heard about that from some of the members in the Albany Jewish community.
Yeah.
But do you have any recollection?
I have no recollection of a synagogue. I know there was one because during my tenure as mayor, I did spend some time researching all 37 places of worship in the history of the city of Cohoes. When you have an old city that has a lot of old buildings, you want to know exactly what your history was. So I do remember a synagogue being in the city of Cohoes, not seeing it, but reading about it.
And Cohoes is called the Spindle City?
The Spindle City.
And why is that?
Probably because of the textile mills, the looms. That's where all the textiles. The Cohoes was, not too much different than Lowell, Mass. It was one of the largest textile mills in the Northeast at its time. We used to, back when there was this push for calling this area Tech Valley, we actually trademarked Cohoes, Tech Valley's hometown, because the reality is back then that was the state-of-the-art technology.
And you trademarked it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Don't know if they continued it since I left, but we've kind of moved on past that. But you have to realize, and you know this, is that a lot of people came through New York City, but they moved up to the capital region. And Irish, Italian, French, Russian, Ukraine, all moved to the city of Cohoes. At one time, I think the history's that the city's population peaked at about 23 or 24,000 people.
You're talking about what, the 1920s, 1930s?
Turn of the century.
And you have a Ukrainian church in Cohoes
We still
now?
do. We still do. We have a strong Ukrainian following.
I mean, it's got a beautiful dome on the top. You can see
it. A mile away.
Yeah, you can
You
see
really
it for a
can.
long
Yeah,
ways away,
you
yeah.
can.
So what's been your sense as a freshman in the Assembly, in your first term, it's a 2-year term, what's been your sense sitting there and seeing, as we say in Yiddish, chazarai, and all the mix-ups that go on in the Assembly, on the floor and behind the scenes? I mean, is it something that you're saying, oh, what did I get myself into? How did Ron put up with this for so long?
Well, I did ask about that, yeah. I think you're speaking to what's played out in the media on a regular basis. And
you know more because you know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, being from behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So I don't want to couch it with what's going on up front as opposed to what's going on behind. So that's why I was saying it the way I said it, because you have a different view than,
overall, I mean, there's 150 assembly members, 63 senators. Assembly members represent 125,000 people, give or take. Senators, 300,000. All good people. They're not supermen or superwomen.
Right.
They're good people. They're elected from their community. They, in most situations, reflect the makeup of their community. Unfortunately, just like in any organization, I'm a pharmacist, we have the same issues in pharmacy at times. People lose their focus. They lose their compass. This past year, there's been at least 2 or 3. I mean, if you look over a 15 to 20 year period, it adds up to be about 18 to 20 people that have just really not done some very wise things. 30. Yeah, that's a good word.
30.
30?
30.
I lost track.
I know.
But and I don't minimize that by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's important to note that there are a lot of good people there that sit there and they say, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But at the end of the day, you go back to your office, you look at your legislation, you focus on what's your constituents' issues are. I don't really...
But do you think that this tarnishes your reputation, that it has a reflection on you
many
personally?
many people have said to me, I'm glad you're there because you're the kind of person that could change it. I'm going to try to be that agent of change. I know one thing. I know what my values are. I'm not going to compromise my values for some of the craziest things I've seen people do down there. It's crazy.
But when when you look at a situation like Assemblyman Boylan,
Yeah.
And, you know, Channel 6 has been after him for quite a bit. And they even went down to, they sent a reporter down to his district.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, and they interviewed folks in his, you know, right in the heart of his district that would say, you know, they said, well, look at what he did here and look at what he did. Yes, but he's my assemblyman and we like him. So it's, you know, and we want to keep him. And we're not, and he got reelected even though he's up on charges.
Yeah.
You know, Malcolm Smith is up on charges and he got reelected. I mean, all these folks who are up on charges, they keep getting reelected by their constituents. You know, we've had a few of them sit and do nothing in their seats because the speaker didn't want to allow them to advance their career while they were under indictment. And, you know, but you see this happening time and time. Anthony Seminario was someone who was there for a long time, just sitting in his seat, and he wouldn't do anything. He'd be in the back sitting, you know, talking on the phone or sitting in his assembly seat, and they really just ignored him. And I remember when Carl Kruger in the Senate was up on charges, he simply sat outside of conference. They didn't even let him into conference. I mean, and I think Malcolm Smith is in that situation now. He used to be the leader of the state Senate, Democrats, and he doesn't even go to conference now. So, you know, you got a lot of these cases that you just look at this and you see 30 members being hauled out at one time or another in handcuffs and you know, doing the perp walk, as they say, in front of the cameras. And you're like, well, how do I do good when all these people are doing so bad? You know.
I mean, and not to minimize it, but you know, you have to look at statistics, all right? You've got maybe 4 or 5 people right now that are on the chopping block, one way or the other. Vito's gone, right?
Vito Lopez is Vito.
So you got 5 out of 200, all right? That's not good by any stretch. 1 is not good. That being said, you've got to focus on why you went there. Your focus was not there to take the people's money and do nothing. Your job is to be out there to represent their interests, to try to put forth good legislation that's meaningful, that's going to make a difference in people's lives, and not to just put a bunch of bills up there that you know are not going to go anywhere. I'm very cautious about that. I was not, even though I was the mayor and I had a very strong bond with my common council. You almost couldn't tell who was the mayor and who was the legislative body. I've always respected the fact that, you know, you don't just pummel a bunch of laws out there just to say you did a lot of bills.
Yeah.
It is disturbing that people can be bought.
Mm-hmm.
It's very upsetting. It's not something, and matter of fact, as you know, we have been very fortunate here in the Capital Region to have had great representatives that you never really had to question their integrity.
Well, Dick Connors.
Dick Connors is a great example, Ron Canisteri, Mike McNulty, Jack McEnany, Neil Breslin, Mike Breslin. We can go on and on and on.
Sure.
Bob Riley.
Right.
These are all great, credible people. The interesting dynamic, and
Then
most
we had
people,
Joe Bruno on the other side, but
Joe Bruno.
we don't know what's going to happen.
We don't know
that.
what's going to happen with
Right.
Joe Bruno. Joe Bruno is its own challenge. And to be honest with you, Joe Bruno truly has put Albany back on the map.
Yes, he did.
People don't like to admit that.
No,
They like
the
to.
airport wouldn't be the airport.
The airport
without
wouldn't be
him.
the airport. The train station would be the train
Right.
station. And Global Foundries, he played a role
That's
in
right.
that too.
Very good.
And that should not be lost on people. Now, that doesn't mean we condone at least what he's alleged to have done.
Exactly.
But the reality is, at some point, that has to find its own cause. The gentleman's 84 years old. He did a lot for Albany, and that should not be lost on anybody.
Now, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. And finish
So
your
anyways,
thought.
the point is that we have always been very fortunate to have very good, strong representation and people of high moral value here in the Capital Region. In the city, the challenge is this. The most desired position for assembly members in the members of the New York State Assembly is on the city council. 5 members.
New York City Council.
New York City, 5 members just recently are leaving office. I'm jumping up in seniority by 9 positions this year because 9 people are leaving.
Mm-hmm.
They're leaving. One's going to be a
Yes.
DA in Washington County, Tony Jordan.
Right.
Another one's going to be the village clerk.
Right,
And then you've got 5 others that are going to go to the city council.
right.
That's the better desired job.
And then in the Senate, you have Eric Adams, who's going
Right.
to be the
Borough
Brooklyn Borough President.
Right. So the salary, and I'm not complaining about the salary is $79,500. It's been that way for 15 years, whatever it may be. But to somebody living in New York City,
It's really
to be
not
traveling
that
up and forth,
It's not
And
worth
the
it.
New York City Council gets paid more, and you're closer to home. Mark
And you get
Weprin-
member items.
Okay.
New York City has member items,
And
no member items here.
Mark Weprin, I mean, if you look at the overall city, Oliver Capel, who was the state attorney general, was on the city council until he was term limited. You know, there were so many people who have been on the New York City Council because it's more money and it's less travel time. So,
Yeah,
anyway,
so you might not always be getting, people coming up here for the best reasons sometimes.
but I just want to, I want to full disclosure. I know we have
finish
to,
it off, yeah.
we have a scarce minute, but, I did work for a little bit with the New York Pharmaceutical Societies, and you had a bit, and I know that OMIG, the Office of Medicaid Inspector General, really had a big hammer under the Spitzer administration for pharmacists, and you were caught up in something like
absolutely.
that.
Yep.
But you resolved it.
We resolved it,
Yeah.
absolutely. It was unfair, it was government at its worst. I'm glad to see there's some reforms put in place so other nonprofits, other small businesses aren't going to be pummelized like we were. It was a very painful process for us, for over an innocent, innocuous mistake of admitting that we put records and destroyed them.
You're supposed to hold them for 7 years, and you destroyed
6
them
years,
after
we
6.
destroyed them up to 5.
Oh, okay. So
And
1
for,
year.
for $8,000 worth of claims, which we had the patient prove that they had gotten them, the doctor attested they gave the prescription,
Right.
they wanted $2.8 million.
So
That's
they
not
get
good
so
government.
picky.
And they got how? They wanted how much?
They wanted $2.8 million,
And they got how much?
$276,000.
The fact that you had $276,000 to give them is impressive.
We didn't have it.
Oh.
We had to borrow it.
Oh,
I have a responsibility to the 37 people that work for me
Yes,
to
you
keep
do.
their jobs. And New York State government tried to put them out of business. I can move on and do anything I want in life. I could be a pharmacist anywhere I want. But the reality is, we've been here 83 years, and I was going to be darned if New York State was going to put our family business out of business.
good for you.
All right, thank you very much. We're out of time, but we're going to give you a blessing that you should continue with your good work, and then you'll come back and report to us on the Jewish View. So everything good over here. Thank you, Assembly person, member McDonald over here, John McDonald. So very good. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mark, for being on the Jewish
Thanks
View.
for being
Very
here.
good. Thank you. My pleasure.